Rick, it's so nice to meet you, and I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. So thank you for taking your time to be on here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this because you have such an interesting path in the arts. And when I say the arts, I'm talking about, you studied to become a playwright, you were teaching, you started an art space, a gallery, which we're going to be talking about. So I would love for you to take us really kind of back to the beginning, because you grew up in Hamilton, Ontario. Is that close to Toronto?
Yeah, that is about 45 minutes west of Toronto. Yeah.
Okay, my husband has family members out there.
Oh, okay.
He's from Toronto. So I thought I'd heard them talk about Hamilton before.
Yeah.
Small
Yes.
world.
Yeah.
So yeah, take us back to that. You end up going to New York City to become a playwright. So yeah, let's hear about that journey.
Yeah, so I grew up near Toronto, and then I went to film school in Montreal, and I ended up back in Toronto where the film industry was, and I was kind of doing this thing that everyone in film school in Canada would do, which is you converge on Toronto, you find your department, and I was working as in the art department as like a set dresser, driving around in a truck, and I, everyone's sort of, the goal was to work your way up in the film industry, and if you wanted to be a filmmaker, of course, find your way into somehow doing that independently. But I just for whatever reason, um, started writing plays, and I had some theater background from when I was much younger. And after being in Toronto for a few years, I decided to apply to this program, the creative writing program at Brooklyn College, and they accepted me, and I moved to New York to study playwriting.
Mm.
So that was the beginning, the beginning of my New York, journey. But I should maybe say that my mother is from Brooklyn originally, so she grew up in Flatbush, and met my father like in the 1960s, and he's from Montreal. So they met, got married, moved to Montreal. I was born in Montreal, and my family moved to Hamilton. My dad got a job in Hamilton, but as a result of that, I had American citizenship, dual citizenship, and I also had family in New York, because my grandparents were in Brooklyn. They actually ended up in, of all places, Howard Beach, Queens. But we would regularly visit New York, so there was like this comfort and familiarity with New York. And so when I was in this moment in my mid 20s, where I started thinking about leaving this sort of film industry universe and pursuing an MFA in playwriting, there's only a few schools that I was considering, and one of them was Brooklyn College. To this day, they have this pretty strong um, program in the English department, which is divided between poetry, fiction, and playwriting. And, I got in and I moved, and that was in '98. And that was the beginning of my New York, you know, transition, I guess, call it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had some background, and connections with Brooklyn. You were moving into your film career, and then, kind of pivoted
Mhm.
into playwriting in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So then tell me a little bit about that. So you get your MFA
Mhm.
from Brooklyn College, and then you go on and you teach for a while. What
Yeah.
did that look like for you?
So everybody that was in this program, whether you were a poet or a fiction writer or a playwright, everyone was encouraged. And I think a lot of MFA people who've done MFA programs will probably be familiar with this. You're encouraged to become an adjunct professor, and especially in the English department at Brooklyn College, where there's so many students at that school that are taking the core courses in the English department, like writing, essay writing and all these things. So I, like a lot of my fellow students, I became, an adjunct professor, and so I was teaching at Brooklyn College. And when I finished my MFA, in addition to, working on my playwriting and doing some producing in theater, I became, an adjunct, one of these New York adjuncts. And anyone who's listening who's, been in that universe, it's like this funny, it's like you are often, sort of like commuting between campuses. I was at Hunter one semester. I'll be at Hunter and Brooklyn College with a course at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. You're patching together this existence because the pay is so crappy. And yeah, so I did that. I did that for several years. I was a New York adjunct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I love that you're doing the adjunct shuffle,
Yeah. Yeah.
all over New York,
Mhm.
working on your plays, writing, and then tell me how this pivot happened where you decided, okay, I'm going to open this gallery space.
So I was, I think, always cultivating this weird sort of fantasy that I would have some kind of creative project of my own. I discovered, I think, probably when I was in grad school, that, like, unlike a lot of the other writers who were in my program, I had trouble sitting still, I guess. Like, I wasn't good at I wasn't good at doing quiet work, and the plays that I would bring to the workshops were always like these miniature dramas, because I could write short works, because I was like, I always was like very restless, and it's always something that's been part of my nature. And I also found myself in grad school and after grad school sort of being driven to produce, just because, like, I'd be around playwrights who wanted to get their work produced. And even at Brooklyn College, everyone was moaning and whining about, like, why isn't the theater department doing our work? Why aren't they producing our work? Blah, blah. And so I started going, for instance, to the Lower East Side and, like, just booking spaces. At the time you could get these basement theaters on Ludlow Street. And I would set up auditions, and I basically just was a producer, and it wasn't really consciously like I was, trying to shift gears from playwriting to producing. It was just the impulse. I always had this impulse to create things and, build collaborative environments and produce things. And, I was much happier doing that stuff than I was sitting alone writing. So the gallery was purely an impulsive, kind of like ridiculous idea that I came up with, that partly was prompted by Hurricane Sandy. So I moved to Red Hook, Brooklyn 2 months before this, like, superstorm that came through New York, of course, and everybody knows how devastating it was. And it was particularly devastating to certain, flood plains, like vulnerable neighborhoods. Like Red Hook was totally destroyed, as was the Rockaways. And I had just moved to Red Hook because I really thought the neighborhood was charming. I had been there many times, and I had just moved in, and this storm completely knocked out all the power, and the neighborhood was kind of out of commission for almost a year. And I, like a lot of people, would spend time with friends in other neighborhoods and stuff like that. But, this idea that I'd been sort of like cultivating to launch some kind of creative endeavor that was my own, came to this sort of fruition because after Hurricane Sandy, all these small businesses in Red Hook left the neighborhood, because they couldn't function, and as the recovery process was underway, there were all these very charming little storefronts on Brunt Street, which is the main drag in Red Hook, that suddenly were vacant and available. And I knew that I didn't want, for example, to open or to launch a theater. I didn't want to have to deal with, like the chaos of producing plays in a theater space. I didn't want to do anything like that. And to be frank about it, I don't know if I felt a lot of what's the word? I didn't feel compelled to work with playwrights. I didn't want to work with theater people. I felt for some reason like I wanted to open a visual arts project space gallery. And there was one particular place, storefront, that used to be a hair salon, and it was vacant. And I went and I phoned the number that was in the window, and the landlords were this Italian couple who lived upstairs with four of their kids. And, they invited me over, and we chatted over their kitchen table. And they were like, I said, I just want to open an art gallery. And they were, they were like, okay, here's a lease. And I signed the lease, and there was it was crazy because I had no background in the art world at all, zero. And I had no background in running a small business. And I just had this belief that a gallery, having, of course, been to art galleries, had to be super, super doable, because you obviously just have a show that's up for however many weeks, and then you just have another show and you have a party. And that's it. You just have a party and you have a show. And what could be so hard about that? It's not like you're waiting, it's not like you're waiting for the baguette in the morning to arrive, and the bologna and this soda truck. It's no, it's just it's easy peasy, no problem. And it was really that insane and that naive and that impulsive. I didn't do homework. I did, in fact, as I was sort of getting closer and closer to pulling the trigger and doing this thing, I did talk to I did make phone calls and have lunches with some people who ran small galleries. There's a woman who has this wonderful, to this day, she has this wonderful space in Red Hook called the Kempler International Drawing Space. Yes. And, she talked to me and gave me advice. Her space was a nonprofit. And at the time I was asking her, do you think it should be a nonprofit? Should it be a commercial gallery? I don't know. I had no idea. And she advised against it being a nonprofit, because she, had spent so many years struggling with writing grants, applications, and whatever. And I spoke to some other people just very superficially. And I chose to just do it. And what I did was I moved out of my apartment, which was around the corner, and I sublet it, and I moved into the back of the gallery, where I lived for 2 years, and I had a membership at a gym, and I had my dinner at the bar up the street for 2 years, basically. And I had, and I continued as an adjunct professor, and I was making really crappy money, but the rent was so cheap, it was the rent was I don't know, something like $1,600 a month. And I was getting a little extra from my sublet, and I was teaching like a madman at these colleges, and I was also doing these side hustles of various kinds. And and I just became this kind of weirdo who was living in this space, and launching this gallery with no business doing it at all, no business. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of my gallery, Peninsula.
But that's like the beauty right there is I think having a beginner's mindset or being like naive about something and just jumping in and figuring it out as you go instead of sitting there thinking, well, maybe I should take a class in this, do that, da, 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 like, and then 4 years goes by, you just did it. And I love that you were, living in the back there, eating at the bar.
Yeah.
But I also love that it sounds like the other galleries that you reached out to were very supportive and helpful. And I like that, because we are part of a larger community and
Mhm.
you had moved into this space of the visual arts from theater, and I like that there was a welcome reception for you to kind of begin to enter a little bit, at least I hope so.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, luckily, I knew so little at the time that I don't even think, I don't even think, this is 2013. I don't think I knew where like the art neighborhoods were in Manhattan aside from Chelsea. Like I don't think I would have known, for example, oh, maybe I should go to the Lower East Side and talk to some small galleries and like see how what they think of this idea. Like I didn't know how to take the temperature. I didn't know who to talk to. I just sort of like walked into some like Red Hook and Brooklyn places and had some really nice conversations with people, and they thought I was kind of like crazy, I think, and like a little bit. Um, I did, full disclosure, looking back on it, like you say, I'm thankful that I didn't decide to go down this whole like 4 or 5 year, preparation period. And I'm thankful that I didn't do enough research. I'm thankful I didn't do the kind of research that would have opened my eyes to how like completely daunting running an art gallery is for real. And
Mhm.
I so and the other thing is that, my nature just as a creature in the universe, like like I have a brother-in-law who like was raised by, a single mother who like struggled with 4 kids, and like he learns the terror of like instability, you know what I mean? And it guides him in his life. And like, I didn't grow up, in I didn't, my family wasn't a wealthy family, but I mean I was comfortable, and my parents were like both cultured and kind of like space cadet, like intellectuals who like, I didn't evolve into someone with, rational concerns about living
Mhm.
my life. And I didn't have, and they, they did produce one very rational child, my sister, but like I kind of whatever. I developed this ability to partly because I also don't have kids and I'm not dragging other people into it, but like, I developed this kind of interest in creative endeavors and like willingness to just kind of like throw it all out there. And
Jump
so
into it,
yeah,
just
yeah,
jumping
yeah,
into it.
yeah, yeah. So that's sort of the
So
kind of the start of the gallery. Yeah.
yeah, so I love hearing this story of how it was starting. And you said, you really didn't have any background in the art, but here you are running this gallery. So how do you start to find artists, or how does this develop? Because obviously you've been successful, it's still going. You now have a space, you've moved from Red Hook into the Lower East Side.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. Like, how was that learning process for you?
It was really, really interesting, actually. I mean, like I said, I had this completely simplistic idea of simplistic, but pretty accurate. I mean, it was accurate in the sense that, oh, I'm just going to have shows and shows, and which is all perfectly true. Nothing has changed since day one, actually. But like, what I did was, it's funny because I thought, well, if I'm going to launch this space, I want the inaugural show to be somehow a kind of an ode to this neighborhood that I developed a lot of affection for Red Hook, as people do who live there. And like, I just found this photographer. I mean, I think it was Google. I think I Googled and I found this local Brooklyn photographer who had just created this body of work that captured Red Hook and Gowanus. And he had taken these very sort of, I don't know, they were like these lonely, ghostly, black and white photographs of the neighborhood that I thought were, kind of beautiful. And, I reached out to him and he was very excited to have a show. And that's how I launched the space with this. It was my own, like, it was my whole, like, process. And I think I had like hors d'oeuvres, which is ridiculous. I think I had hummus or something you could imagine. And, and I opened the gallery with this show for this photographer, and it was a good show actually, and his work really was very strong and very beautiful. And I'm forgetting his name, Tom Moto. That's not his last name. Sorry. I will get it later. But like, he was the guy who launched the show with me, with the gallery with me. But what happened with the gallery, which is really interesting story, I think, and I love to tell this story. While I didn't have any background in the art world, I grew up with, as I said, my parents were kind of cultured people, and I grew up in a very industrial steel town. So Hamilton, Ontario is a steel town. And, I had a very diverse group of friends, and, I went to a public school where, I was like the only Jew with like among all my Irish friends and Protestant friends and whatever. And, my parents were uniquely kind of just into like, both my parents were into like poetry, and my mom loved contemporary art. She loved art. And it's not like she and I held hands and went to the museum together. We actually didn't always get along so well, to be honest with you. But I grew up in a house, unlike most of my friends, that had, a lot of art. And, what my mom would do is, she had, for example, like framed posters, with like Rothko or like, whatever. And, so I was surrounded by like an appreciation for visual art, real contemporary art by 20th century American masters, which is what she kind of really loved. And she also was a huge fan of what's her name? She's originally from Canada. She did those grid paintings, Agnes Martin. And so I was exposed to this like deep appreciation for modern and contemporary art. And what she would do is she would also go to this, I think the only semi-serious art gallery in Hamilton, Ontario, was run by this guy, Ron Moore. I still remember his name because, she had this friendship with him, and like, every now and then she would drag my dad, to Ron Moore's gallery in Hamilton, Ontario. And she would force my dad to like dish out whatever it was, $500 for like a painting, or $1,000 for a painting by some Canadian painter, and my parents actually started out in Montreal. So she did that in Montreal too. And, my parents are now, my mom just celebrated her 90th birthday. And,
Wow.
they now live in Toronto. They live in a tiny apartment in Toronto. And in this little apartment, they have like, it's like a 1 bedroom in a nice neighborhood, but they have this 1 bedroom apartment. And it's like full of like wonderful Canadian art that my mom over the years accumulated. And, 90% of it is stuff that was really by emerging like kids that she was like, this is great. This is Ron. This is great. My husband won't pay 500, give it to me for 300, she considered herself, I think, to be, like, she always really was proud of her New York identity, as like this New Yorker in this like kind of very weird industrial Canadian city. And she was like, I'm a New Yorker and I love art, and she was like that. And so all of that to say that after I had my opening show for this photographer, that was actually quite good, and it was all nice. I sort of like took a path that was just instinctive. It wasn't even a decision. I just instinctively decided that I need to always have a really serious art world person helping me guide the programming of this gallery, right? So what happened was I met an artist in the neighborhood who was super young, and she was really, really very good. And she was this wonderful, she was a sculptor, and she made these beautiful, delicate works out of wood and I think bone, and she did photography. And she was brilliant, actually. And she was, I think, she was like 20 or something. I don't know. And she had a studio in the neighborhood. She just graduated, I think. And she, of course, I became friends with her in the most crazy way. Like I actually became friends with her because I was looking for a Craigslist apartment share, because I think originally, before moving into the gallery, I was going to downsize to a share, and she was like looking for a roommate, and then I didn't end up moving in with her, but I was just chatting with her. I was like, art gallery. She's like, artist. I'm like, oh, we should have coffee. Long story short, she became a friend. She helped me sort of with the architecture of the space because she understood galleries very well. And her father was an architect and like all this stuff. And one day she's like, listen, I have a friend who just graduated from Columbia University, and she's brilliant. And she has a day job at this really, really serious Lower East Side gallery called Lisa Cooley, where she's like an administrative assistant. And she's going to have a big career probably in the art world. And she is, she's curating her first show. She studied art history, and she has this show in Bushwick. You should come check it out and meet her, because I think the space is kind of like reneging on their arrangement with her. They were supposed to give her a few weeks. They're only giving her a weekend, blah, blah, blah. So I went to this thing and I met this woman. Her name is Rachel Valinsky. And, fresh out of college, I forget how old she was, but early 20s, and like she was really bright, and she had curated this really compelling show. And I didn't know anything at all, but I guess my whole point, going back to this thing about my mom's appreciation for art, I just felt very comfortable in that world. I felt very comfortable with around, even conceptual art, which is what she was interested in. And like, I may not have had as much knowledge and background as a lot of the people that I ended up working with at the gallery, but like, I didn't feel intimidated by it, and I felt comfortable, I think, because of my mother's like sort of appreciation. So I met her, and she's like, yeah, I've got to be out of here tomorrow. I was supposed to get this place for a week. I was like, look, it's a great show. Let's bring it to my space. It'll be my second show. I just opened a space. Why don't you do that? And so she came. We brought it over to my space. I think it was like a 6-week show with a group of conceptual artists that were all very young. And, after that, I asked her if she wanted to do another show. She said, oh, I'd love to. And I basically like made her the director. Like, she was like basically like 12 years old. Like, I'm like, do you want to be the director? Like, she was like, and I have to make sure I get this right, because, if she hears this interview, I don't want her to sue me or anything, but like she agreed to basically help me shape the programming and take the lead and guide the whole thing. I really was like just paying the rent and standing a little beside and a little behind her, and kind of, everything that she was doing, I had just like sort of like a background influence on, but like kind of just sort of, but I liked the work, and I was learning through her, right? I was learning about really everything. So Rachel Valinsky took great pleasure, of course, writing these like really, really, really like cryptic like press releases that were like so like philosophical, and I had show after show, and Rachel was my director, really. Like, I mean, she was my director, and I gave her this like stipend. I don't even know how I don't even know where I found the money, but I gave her this tiny, tiny, tiny stipend. Like, I think that's what it was called. It was like this, I forget. It was probably like, I don't know. It was a few $100 a
Yeah.
month or something. But she, I think, was, building this great little, um, for her resume. She was launching a gallery in Red Hook, and we had these shows that were curated by her and or people that she knew, all of whom were like so like enthusiastic and so excited, and so like, oh my god, everybody was like, I met all these artists, and they just were, every show was fabulous. Like, the space was beautiful. It was a 500 square foot space with a glass storefront, and it had been a hair salon before. And I had a friend who had done construction, who I had friends also who were artists. It's not like I was a completely out. I wasn't a total outsider in that sense. Like,
Yeah.
I had a wonderful friend who went to Cooper Union, who was an artist whose father was in construction, and he helped me like renovate the space, and it was beautiful. And Rachel and her community of curators put on show after show after show. They were all like mind-bogglingly good. I started getting reviews, I started getting attention, and over, as far as the New York City art world, I remained mostly under the radar. But like, we got like, I think, a hyperallergic review, like for a show that we did, a solo show for an artist, and to um I was going to Pioneer Works around the corner from me, and developing relationships with somewhat with those people, and like that world. And I met some artists who were in their residency program, and I developed collaborations with like these wonderful organizations like Residency Unlimited, which has this great, residency program for foreign artists to come to New York. And like, I hosted them. I hosted them at my gallery on a few occasions, and I started hosting these organizations in the neighborhood for some of the younger, sort of like underrepresented
Mhm.
kids in the community, I guess you could say, trying to do all that stuff. And like, I was within 3 years of launching the gallery, knowing nothing. I was a gallerist. I kind of understood. I kind of understood after like working with Rachel Valinsky how things worked. I mean, it's and so that was like what I would call like phase one, was the Rachel Valinsky era. And the crazy thing is that during that era, we showed like Loie Hollowell. We showed Loie
Mhm.
Hollowell before. A lot of people showed Loie Hollowell. And she, of course, went on to have like really a wonderful, wonderful career. And she's now at Pace. Um,
Mhm.
we showed Meg Lipke, who also has this great career and who's such a fabulous artist. And those are just two of so many
Mhm.
artists that we worked with during their emerging phase of their careers. And and I mean, all the while, I was just this dude who was like I was for so long. Also, of course, as you might imagine, I was suffering the most crippling imposter syndrome. Right, so you know, you suffer imposter syndrome in all kinds of different industries and environments. And I've experienced it many times because I have in the past 20 years gone into several industries and several creative endeavors, actually, like from advertising to screenwriting to all these different things. And like I I've never felt the pain of like feeling an imposter in the art world, because it's like you are like I remember, I used to, we would have our opening. I would love all of the lead up to the opening, talking to the artists, going to their studios, picking up the art. Like it's almost like when I was producing theater, it's like I really liked being kind of just collaborating with all the makers and making it happen and come to life, right? But then when it was like 6 o'clock and like we had to sort of, people started walking in, and Rachel Valinsky would like come up the street, and she had these like bangs and like her black hair, and like I would just get scared. I was like scared of Rachel. I'd like go to the bar up the street. I would go to the bar. I would like go to the bar and I would like drink at the bar. I would like literally hide from people. I would hide. They were like, "Where's Eric? Isn't this his gallery?" And I don't know. Like he was here a second ago. I think he'll probably come later. Because like I was afraid. I was like, I really was like, because like because even though I felt like I had a very good eye for art, and I still do think that, I literally have taken one, college level art history class, and everything else is, I didn't, all these years later, I did not ever, and I should, this is a flaw, I'm confessing, but I did not ever say to myself, Eric, it's time you just sat down and started at least reading about more deeply about art history, and like maybe taking some courses, go to Sotheby's, why not, right? So,
Yeah, but you still had such a background, with your
I
mom. Your mom's a collector,
no,
and so it's you were around it. But I love that you're pointing out this idea of imposter syndrome, because we all have those moments, right? How did you start to overcome that imposter syndrome?
I think, I mean, I haven't completely I mean, it's been 11 years. I have not completely overcome the imposter syndrome. And I think I sort of like eventually got over it, basically just because, you learn on the job, and, you get enough, I guess, sort of, what's the word? You get enough support and reassurance from these like skilled and knowledgeable and talented artists, that over the years tell you that they trust your judgment, and that they think you're doing a good thing. And not all of them. I mean, I've had encounters where I've been told maybe I'm not doing the best work, but like since mostly it's been positive, and most of the artists that I've worked with over the years, I think, have just been very happy with their experiences with the gallery. I guess that overcomes this like, oh shit, someone's gonna ask me a question about like the like whatever the like like the
Modernist movement. Yeah,
they're going to start talking to me about like movements,
yeah, yeah.
what came before and after, like, I mean, it was pop, like, please don't
A
ask me these
pop quiz art history that
questions,
happens.
like, I
Yeah.
had, I did have like this moment when I kind of developed, for instance, this real interest and fascination with, I guess, what do they call the precisionists? Like I was into poetry for a while, as a writer, like,
Mhm.
and there was this period where a lot of these New York poets like William Carlos Williams was having these very close relationships with visual artists, and there was like this whole network. And
Yep.
there were certain things that I'm very interested in, and that I've read about, and that I like, and that I can talk about. And I think I can talk about how certain artworks are working or not working. But I still have some imposter syndrome, just about the limitations of my knowledge about the history of art and the art world and all that stuff. Which still, it's fine though, like whatever. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but I got over it. And Rachel Valinsky left to go to graduate school, and it was this funny moment for me because she'd kind of launched the gallery for me, really. And I was left with this sort of like, I don't know, this like the gallery was like this at that point was like this disgruntled teenager. It's like, what are you gonna do now? Like, all right, buddy. Like, and I
What have you got? What are you gonna do? You're like,
yeah, it's
oh.
like, yeah. So what happened was just completely pure luck. Even though I did not attend any gallery parties or any art world parties, I was still a complete, total, just like working guy who was, I didn't have time to sort of attempt, even if I wanted to get into the inner circles, I didn't know where they
Mhm.
were and I didn't have time and I was like trying to pay the rent. But I knew, I knew Edward Thorp Gallery in Chelsea
Mhm.
because um, my partner, um, Jenny, who is still my partner, she and I have been together for I shouldn't get this for like about 8 or 9 years, and at the time when I was kind of like in this limbo after this woman left, she had worked as an assistant at this gallery, Edward Thorp. And Edward Thorp, for those who don't know, was kind of a very substantial gallery in Chelsea. And he, kind of cultivated a lot of big talents. And he, I think, like Eric Fischel was someone I think he represented. And he was a big player. And you know, Jenny had worked there for a while, and so I kind of knew the gallery through her, even though she left and moved on. She works in fashion, and she moved on to other things. But I think she was the one who said, I think Johnny left Edward Thorpe because I guess Edward Thorpe was closing. Johnny Mullen
Mhm. Mhm.
was the director at Edward Thorpe Gallery, Johnny G. Mullen. And
Mhm.
I had met him like just in passing. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I had this sudden idea, if this guy is available and if he's, this former director for this Chelsea gallery, what if I can convince him to just help me fill in this gap, and like come and curate a show? And I invited him for a beer and we went out and I told him about my situation in my gallery. And, he knew Jenny and was fond of her. And I had met him but hadn't really gotten to know him. But I quickly realized that he was this like very, very warm and extremely thoughtful and kind of like down to earth. He's an artist. He's a painter, and he and he was very willing and interested in coming to Red Hook and doing a show of his own creation, like in this off the radar space. Um, because even though he'd spent 10 years in Chelsea, he really, I think it's fair to say that he really loved and held on to this kind of like he really loved this golden era of New York, like in the 80s, when it was easier to do kind of like these, you know, um, I don't know. I don't want to call them punk rock, but like, these shows that were a little
Yeah,
bit more,
pop-up experimental kind of
yeah,
cool
like
shows that were
downtown
happening in
art shows when things were a little bit more collaborative and like the
Brooklyn.
art world was a little bit less, you know, complicated and rigid.
Mhm.
And he came to New York from Edinburgh. And he had a career and still has a career. He's one of, I represent him at Peninsula now, and like, but he had this wonderful experience, like a lot of artists of his generation, where he was down, he had a loft in Tribeca, I think, and he shared it with like, who's who of the art world, and like, went to all these parties and like went to LA for a year to do a show. Like, it was, I think, a time when things were a little bit easier for artists in terms of getting your work out there. And and he worked at several galleries, I think, before working with Edward Thorp, and he really, really lived and breathed and loved the New York art world. And when I approached him and said, "Look, I like if you're looking for something in the art world to do while you're kind of in your own limbo, I guess, would you want to come and curate a show?" And so he said yes, and he like came up with this idea for a group show, and it was brilliant, and it was amazing. And he did a show, and I'm forgetting now if it was the first or second show he did, but he had a relationship with a gallery in Berlin, and he had spent time in Berlin, and he was like, "What if we do this show that's Brooklyn? Basically, Brooklyn meets Berlin. We have 6 Brooklyn artists, 6 Berlin artists. I'll call my friends. We'll get a big crate of their work shipped to Brooklyn." And I was like, "Well, I don't have money, but I guess let's do it." And I found this money to like ship the work, and like we had this brilliant show. And he had these relationships, right, with these artists from Edward Thorp that changed the game for me, right? So I had, even though I'd shown, of course, these wonderful artists previously, I was now showing artists that were kind of like emerging, but kind of emerging mid-career, and even some artists that were actually quite established, but were just kind of maybe going through a period where they weren't like represented. And he was pulling them into these group shows, and some of them were just like absolutely like just so masterful. And suddenly I had suddenly this little, it had been a conceptual emerging space with Rachel Valinsky, and then he kind of just shifted the programming, not in a radical way. It kind of made sense. And
Mhm.
eventually, after doing 2 3 shows, we settled upon an arrangement a little bit like Rachel, where he would be kind of like my in-house curator. um, he luckily had an arrangement where it was kind of necessary for him to take on some responsibilities with his family, his daughter. So
Mhm.
like he wasn't necessarily looking for the next job somewhere else, and the whole thing just worked out. And he was just very excited to do that. And we had, so this was the next era of Peninsula. So we did like from 2000, I want to say from 2017 or 18, we did this show after show after show. He brought in like this wonderful painter, Graham Durward, um, who's just this completely masterful painter who's had this wonderful career. He's shown with like the Saatchi Gallery and White Columns, and his paintings are gorgeous. And
Amazing.
and he worked with us, and he brought this guy Mike Olin, who's just wonderful. And we started working with Amy Budowich, like a whole. I'm going to leave people out, but like all these people. Actually, Mike Olin's painting is behind me. He gave me this painting. And yeah, and so that's sort of like. I'm sorry if I'm rambling. It's I'm
No,
trying.
no, no, it's
I'm
great.
trying. I'm
I
trying to
love hearing the
squeeze.
story.
I'm trying to.
Yeah, it's
I'm trying to squeeze 11 years into like 20 minutes or whatever, or 5 minutes.
well, it's incredible because you dove into it, you started it, and I think what the beauty is in this is that you also found people who had the same I don't want to say vision exactly, but like the support of artists. Like that seems to be
Yeah.
the thread that I'm noticing that goes through and through is, from your mother who supported emerging artists. So she was there for artists to, you finding Rachel and you're supporting an artist and kind of giving her the reins. And then, moving to Johnny, that's his name, right? Johnny. Yes,
Johnny
Johnny,
Miller.
Johnny.
Johnny Miller.
Yeah, whose paintings are fantastic. Um,
Mhm.
and he had this, like you said, this New York City Tribeca loft when there was like loft spaces available still
Mhm.
experience. And you like championed that. And
Yeah.
then you've moved forward and now you guys are actually in Tribeca.
Yeah. So we're now in Chinatown, Lower East Side.
Okay, Lower East
And
Side, yeah.
yeah, so what happened was, yeah, that's totally right. So like, this was the evolution of the gallery. It's kind of a great story. And Johnny joined me. He was always we developed this wonderful partnership. From the get-go all the way till today, I've been kind of the sole like owner with skin in the game,
Mhm.
and I've always
Mhm.
had people like helping. I've always had one person who went from Rachel to Johnny, and Johnny to this day is sort of like the provides much of the vision and the direction and the sort of art world insights. And artists that I work with now tell me that, like, I go with Johnny to obviously to studio visits when we're getting a show planned and stuff like that, and he has this uncanny ability to like to articulate um what is happening in an artist's work and what maybe they should be or shouldn't be doing. Like, I know as a playwright, having been in workshops, it's always difficult to kind of navigate how you talk about another artist's work, and you can't.
Mhm.
You have to be careful, because you're dealing with someone's imagination, and you don't know. But he has this like really really sophisticated way of sort of like responding to, reflecting on, and providing insight into an artist's work that is like nobody else. Like, I've had like Graham Durward, some other, and I think like Amy Budowich. They've said to me, they're like, Johnny is like just a genius when it comes to this, and so he's been this invaluable source of, he's like the vision for the gallery, and he and I, unlike I think Rachel, who had a much more kind of conceptual vision. I, what I he's closer to what I'm comfortable with in terms of like we sort of have a shared sensibility in some ways. Um, so he and I kind of like took the gallery into this next phase, and um, we sort of shifted from like a project space into a more traditional commercial gallery. We started, I want to say, informally representing artists. Like, I don't sign contracts with any of the artists who I informally represent, and I call it informally because like my arrangement is that I am committed to a group of artists, and I have been for about 4 years with Johnny. We've been dedicated to them. We love their work. We're absolutely championing everything they do. We're carefully putting them into group shows, and they've all at this moment had their 2 rounds of solos, and we're very conscious of it all. Um, but I just don't see the point in formally representing anyone because of the reality of the kind of gallery that I have. Like my gallery has turned into, I think, a very strong small New York gallery. I guess what some people used to call a feeder gallery, right? I mean, galleries like mine feed the art world by cultivating emerging talent, mid-career talent. But I'm very aware that the goal to some degree is to lose these people. I mean, on some level, the goal is to lose them. You want to give them the kind of exposure where they are going to be approached by galleries that can just do much more for them than I can do. And at this stage, like, I don't intend to remain at this level. I mean, I do hope in the next 5 or 10 years, I know the art world is treacherous, but if we could stay alive for another 5 or 10 years, maybe I will evolve into a bigger space and a bigger sort of position where I don't really have to think so much about losing artists. But for now, the reality in my mind is that yes, these artists have an unspoken agreement with me that we together are going to build their careers so that they can grow. And for them, obviously, growth means, best case scenario, long run, right? You go to Pace,
Yeah.
you go to Hauser and Wirth or whatever. Like, you get up there and
Yeah.
you move, and I've had it happen already, obviously. I mean, it hasn't really happened a lot, to be honest with you, but like, I had an artist like a year ago email me to say, look, thank you for everything, but like there's a gallery that's interested in me, and I think they can sell more of my work, and
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
space is bigger, and this was one of the artists that I was showing that was established. Um, his name's Michael Kirkham, this wonderful, wonderful painter who's based in Berlin, and and I was happy. I was happy for him. There was no hard feelings at
Yeah.
all. Um,
Well, it's
and
interesting being in that position, like you were saying, of like a theater gallery, whatever, where your job and what you're doing is you're drawing attention to these incredible artists who you're dedicated to in hopes that their career will pick up. So it's interesting. It's this idea of like, yeah, then you're like releasing them out into the world, or it's
yeah,
just interesting thinking about that position,
yeah,
of being invested, but also knowing at this point anyway, the outcome that may occur.
yeah.
And so I guess that leads me to my next question, which is, a lot of artists reach out to me, and one of their questions is like, how do I get my work in front of a gallerist, or how do I approach a gallerist? Do you have any advice to those artists?
Um, it's funny because, the worst part of the life of a gallerist, is this whole gatekeeping problem.
Mhm.
You have these opportunities that you can provide, and you have limited time and space, right? So, and I have a unique position. Um, I have a unique perspective because, like, I'm a playwright as well, and I'm also a screenwriter. And like, I'm to this day, actually, um, I occasionally talk to literary agents and literary managers, and it's the same thing for me. I have my own creative work outside of being a gallerist, and I know exactly how it feels. Like, I know this feeling. It's like my work. It's like I'm working so hard. My work is good. Like, just like, please, just give me the time of day. So I think because I have that unique insight as a creator, also, who's knocking on doors and having doors closed on me all the time. Um, I'm very sensitive to it, and so as far as advice, I really think that it's not about sending the right kind of email to galleries. I don't think those emails really work. I don't think this the best strategy is like these um kind of like faceless communications through DMing and stuff like that. I think it's mostly about, if you can muster it, if you're someone who likes people and likes getting out there with people and being around people, I think it's about just building relationships, like, if you're an artist and you're coming out of a program like Hunter or Yale or Brooklyn College or whatever, and like you're getting out there, I mean, focus more, I think, on like the relationships you're having with other artists and going to shows together and like building communities amongst artists that will often more effectively lead you to conversations with an art dealer, with a gallerist, with an art advisor, with somebody who's like connected to somebody who runs a residency program. I mean, you know, it's really the same for like screenwriters and like screenwriting, especially. It's like you go nowhere. It doesn't matter how great you are. You go nowhere if you don't have like friends. Like, and so a lot of us don't have friends. So you gotta like you gotta make friends with the friends of the friends, I guess. I don't know. Like, it's sad. It's really sad. It's really sad. I know. But
Uh,
but I think that's the thing. You can, like, when I'm trying to think, a lot of the time, it is referrals, like, I work with this artist, Jan Baraj, who's a Polish artist. He's originally from Warsaw, and he does this wonderful photography and video and sculpture work. I mean, he's very interesting, and he's he was somebody who I was introduced to because I have a relationship, sort of a friendship with Joanna Malinowska, who's represented by Canada Gallery, and she and I have this funny. I met her in this really crazy funny way, but like, I think she encouraged me to go to his studio. Um, I think these relationships really occur as a result of, meeting people and talking to people, not so much, okay, I'm going to set aside 2 hours to like email these galleries and say to them, dear so and so, I love your programming. And like, I've studied your programming. I'm talking, this is a personalized email. Can't you see that I've thought about you? Like, I get that. And I do that too for like, literary management. It just doesn't, could it work? Maybe, but it's not as good as focusing on making great work, having relationships with other artists who are in your category, going to openings with them, meeting people. Like that's how it goes. And like, like right now, the gallery, as I said, sort of, how did I put it? We unofficially represent like 8 artists. So we met all of them kind of organically. So Amy Budowich, who is originally from Ohio, who we loved her sculptural work. She did this textile sculptural work, and now she's doing painting, but she's amazing. She got her MFA from Hunter, and I think I'm forgetting how some of these relationships originated, but most of them, like, so there's Amy, there's Jerry Blackman, who went to Yale and he did his BFA at Cooper Union, and he's a Brooklyn born guy who I think Jerry, who's a great artist, brilliant, works mostly currently in 3-dimensional sculptural work. I think he was coming to our shows. I mean, he's just one of these people who's like so dialed in. I mean, not and the thing is, and I hope I'm not going over time too much, but like,
No, 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 no. I was just looking at Amy's because I'm from Ohio. So I was like, oh, I wonder where in Ohio she's from. And she's got these great pieces that I'm looking at, these like soft sculpture pieces, and then works on paper.
Amazing. But I mean, Jerry Blackman, for instance, it's funny, and I hope no one takes offense to me saying these things, but like, I think you have to go partly with your nature, right? So some artists that I work with are like so like, I don't know what's the word. They're kind of like they're just these art making creatures, and they are happiest in their studio, and they may not be like the most like super ambitious. Like I'm going to go to these openings. I'm going to get in front of people. Like Jerry, for example, is like a brilliant artist who is also very conscious of like his and my need to engage with the community, right? So he's somebody who actually helps me by kind of like reminding me to get out there and to see certain shows, and and he introduces me to people like it's crazy. Jerry Blackman actually connected me recently with Rob Storr, who is this art world's writer, critic, who is, completely, he's such a heavyweight. And like and Jerry, I forget how it came about, but Jerry went to Yale, so he had some loose connection to Rob Storr, and he was like, you should meet Rob Storr, he's making art. And so I called, that's the other thing about me, I'm totally shameless, even though I do have this imposter syndrome. I'm also like completely shameless, and like I'll like call these people.
It's the best combo right there, though.
Yeah. So I think I called Rob on his phone. I was like, hey, I was like, this I represent this artist, this fabulous artist who he does a lot of fabricating for Ugo Rondinoni, and he went to Yale, and he suggested I reach out to you, and we chat, and he was like, yeah, come on over. And like had lunch at his place in Carroll Gardens, and we're now sort of like friends, I guess. Like I went to his studio in New Haven, and we drove back together, and like, it's like crazy, right? Because like,
yeah,
he's probably never met anyone as totally green and like completely out of the, like, this is a guy who like, we're driving back from New Haven, and he's talking about like, how he has lunch tomorrow with I don't know who, like, like Vito Schnabel or something. He's like, oh, I gotta call Vito. I'm like, oh, I'm like, oh, well, put your seatbelt on. And
Yeah, right.
so I guess part of like what I think this does tie into maybe what your question is, because I have the same issue, right? How do I, as a gallerist slash art dealer, effectively build my gallery and get more and make more relationships? I mean, you just have to, kind of be willing to go out there and meet people and talk to people and take different avenues. And like, like we have, I just want to clarify, I guess, like, so when it comes to the artists that we work with, we have engaged with them and met them, some of them through like, mostly through relationships that were like artists we already knew introduced us, or occasionally it's been, I think, we've seen something out there. Like we have a show opening. Our fall show for September is for Whit Harris. She went to Hunter. She is a New York based, born and bred artist who Johnny kind of noticed out there, because he's always keeping his eye on things much more kind of like avidly than I am. And he was, I guess, whatever, I don't know how many months ago this was, or a year ago, he's like, have you noticed Whit Harris? And I was like, I don't know. Well, I was like, it rings a bell, because although I'm not like deep in the art world, but I do have some good friendships. So one of them is with Graham Wilson, who runs Swivel Gallery. I don't know if you know Swivel Gallery. And like, he's a good friend, because he was an artist before he became an art dealer. And like, I gave him his first solo at my gallery in Red Hook. And so we've been pretty good friends. And like, I knew that he had shown her. I think Graham showed her. And so we went to her studio, and it was actually one of the few times where we kind of just like discovered someone without a referral, without like that. It was like Johnny saw her work out there. And
yeah.
And so she's launching our fall season. It's September 6th. I'm gonna do a little plug. September 6th, Friday, 6 to 9 p.m. It's her first solo in New York City. She let me say that, even though she had something in Brooklyn, a wonderful show that was kind of a solo, but I think she considers this more of her first, because the other thing may have been kind of more of a nonprofit, part of like an organization, and this is with a gallery. So anyway, she's amazing, painter and ceramicist. And I just want to quickly say that the other artists who kind of make up our main 8 artists. So there's also Kevin Darmany, who's originally from Trinidad. He's New Jersey based. He's a figurative painter. Johnny brought him in because Johnny worked with him, actually, like hanging shows at Ed Thorpe. This might just give some of your listeners an idea of how these galleries get their people,
Yeah. No, and I love it. And what I love,
yeah,
I love what you're sharing too, is that you have the personal experience of knocking on the doors, like you said, because you're a creative individual as well. So I love that you can see through the eyes of many artists who are looking for space. And like you said, like the unfortunate part is gatekeeping. But I love hearing also about this idea of relationship building and meeting others. And I am so excited for this solo show.
It's gonna be great.
You said it opens up September 6th. When does it go down?
I should know this, right? I think it's like October 18th or something.
Okay. I'm just wondering selfishly, because I'm going to be up there, so I want to see this work.
Where are you? Where are you now? Are you?
Yeah, so I split time at a lot of places. So my home base right now is Columbus, Ohio, where I have my studio where I'm recording right now. And I spend the summers at Chautauqua Institution because I run the residency program there for artists. And then I share a studio space in Long Island City. So, so a little bit of here or there, but you get how that is as an artist, or being in the arts and creative.
Johnny's in Long Island City as well. And so I
We'll
know
have to hook up. I'd love to see his work in person too.
his work is great. Before we go though, I just do want to say, like, because these
Yeah.
artists who have entrusted me, you know, with their careers, I think I've mentioned so far, and just quickly to give also your artists a sense of how these relationships are made. Kevin Darmody is a figurative painter who Johnny worked with at Edward Thorpe, and who we've been working with for the past like about 4 years. Georgia Elrod is a painter who's on our roster. She's based in Hudson, New York now, and she's originally grew up in NYC, MFA Hunter. She's also co-director of Underdonk, if you know Underdonk. She's great. Johnny Mullen, of course, is my director partner, and his work is great. And Mike Olin, who we had a solo for recently, and who's got something going on in, I think, London right now in a group show. He's masterful. Grew up in California. And Scott Pfaffman, I want to just say, is another artist that we've worked with who, like, for those artists who are listening in and who are like, how do I get into a gallery? I mean, Scott was basically a neighbor in Red Hook. He was like kind of the mayor of Red Hook. Like, he was like the guy who, for those people listening in New York who know the record shop, 360 record shop on Van Brunt in Red Hook, that property is sort of owned by Scott. He lives in the back, and like, he's always outside. If you've ever been there, he's just this wonderful artist who lives there. And like, he was, when I moved into the neighborhood in Red Hook, he was one of these people who just was very generous and very interested in what I was doing. And I didn't work with him originally. Like, I knew he was an artist, but like, it just didn't happen immediately. But like, eventually Johnny and I like did a studio visit. We're like, we've never done a studio visit with you. We know you do this interesting work. And now he's on our roster. And so that's another way it happens. And and then there's Jan Baraj, I mentioned. He's from Warsaw, and does work with us. And the other artist who's more recent, who I'm very lucky to be working with, is Cheryl Donegan. She had a big career, is well known for her video works from the 90s. And she just happens to be a friend of Johnny's. Johnny knew her, and she's started doing this new body of work, making these very delicate kind of stencil like paintings that we had to show for her. And that's most of it. I'm trying to think who I'm forgetting. I also am lucky in the sense that I have my partner, Jenny. She works in the fashion industry, but she's also an artist. She does these wonderful kind of mixed media paintings. And so having somebody who's willing to and understanding of the art world is helpful.
Yes, it is. It's having somebody there that
so that,
you know,
that's it.
it's funny you mentioned Cheryl Donegan. I was just thinking of her work because I saw her speak years and years ago at Ohio State University. I was actually living in New York, but I came back for like a break, and she was speaking. So I went to it, and she had mentioned this book. So there's like a couple things that she said that always stuck with me. She had this book. It was this like German book, Faces and Empty Spaces. And then she said something that really clicked for me, which you've also mentioned, which is that you really, to move forward in your life in general and in the arts, is to just kind of accept your nature. Like, there's always things we can work on, right? But like, we all kind of have a certain temperament or a certain nature. And the more we can own that and not try to fight it, you start to kind of move forward. And it sounds like, that's what you've done in your career. And this has just been so wonderful, Eric, to connect and hear about your space. And congratulations on the show that's happening. I am going to come check it out. I'm really excited to see it. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. And thank you for making time to chat with me.
Oh, well, thank you too, Eric. And I hope you have a great day.
Okay, you too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.